Dear class, welcome to State and Local Government. We are looking at federalism and public education in the US in this video. Let's go. So, what we are doing is essentially reading K.J. Robinson's paper, Disrupting Education Federalism. It was published in 2014. You might be asking, why are we following this paper? Essentially, she offers a very good background on the history of federalism and public education. Let's take a look. So, what is Robinson advocating in the paper? She's proposing that the federal government has a large role to play in public education in the US. She suggests that there are gaps in access to excellent public education. She argues that the federal government must address these gaps in access. What is the current status of educational federalism? So, right now, she says state and local government play a more important role in public education funding. And by that I mean K to 12. Local governments provide the bulk of funding, which is over 40%, and the rest come from state governments, another 40%. Finally, the federal government provides about 10%. The gap in access to excellent education arises as a result of the reliance on local real estate and other local taxes. Poorer school districts get less money for schools per student than richer school districts. So obviously, if you are in a poor neighborhood, the amount of real estate tax that the owners pay is very low compared to what the owners of richer school district areas pay for real estate tax. So this leads to the gap in access to excellent education. Only 11 or so states currently are trying to address this gap by giving more funding to poorer school districts. So you can imagine that a lot more can be done by states as well, right? Only 11 or so are addressing it, at least in 2014. What is the federal government role over time when it comes to public education? So the federal government it has not really just been providing 10% of funding, but has tried to reduce issues of um, inequities in access to public education. It is trying to address these issues. Let's watch the video on desegregation of public schools by Brown versus Board of Education. So do watch this. I'm providing the link in the assignment page. Watch the video on No Child Left Behind, and finally watch the video on Race to the Top. Landmarks in federal policy. So number one would be Brown versus Board of Education ruling. It's a court case that ended segregation in public schools. Prior to this, if you were non-white, you attended non-white schools, and if you were white, you attended white schools. In 1960s, Equal Rights Act gave non-whites the same legal protections as the Bill of Rights. So previously, Amendment 13, 14, and 15 had ensured freedom from slavery. Citizenship was granted and equal protection was offered under the law. However, these were not enforced during Jim Crow in the South. No money? So prior to these legal changes, funding for white for non-white schools was also negligible, and so was access, right? So there weren't many schools for Black children, for Hispanic children, for Native American children, for Asian children, and there wasn't a lot of uh, access. There weren't these schools, there wasn't funding. A main problem was a lack of federal funding for any schools, actually. Up until the 1930s, we know that the federal government was not providing funding for states and local government expenditure. In 1965, the Primary and Secondary Education Acts were passed by Congress, increasing federal funding for public schools. So, for the first time, the federal government was giving large amounts of money to public schools in general. And so it made sense to say desegregation and let's have more kids learning. In 1967, President Nixon and Congress introduced school nutrition programs. So, free lunches and breakfast in school for low income households. This was a major boost to education funding because without these meals, low income families would not be sending their kids to school, perhaps, right? Tracking progress. So, before the 2000s, actually, very little was being done to track progress in schools. However, No Child Left Behind was an initiative of Governor George Bush Jr. of Texas, who later became president in 2000 and helped promote a similar national policy in the US. NCLB required states to report educational scores for reading, writing, and sciences for students to the federal government. Before this, there was no reporting requirement to the federal government. So the race to the top is the latest initiative, positive initiative, I would say, and it is by President Obama. In 2009, he persuaded Congress to increase federal funding to states by over 100 billion. That's a lot of money. And finally, we see some attempt to address inequities through higher funding. So if states were not going to do it, then the federal government was. In the end, Robinson concludes that she also looks at how money was being spent within the educational system and talked about graduating kids at a higher rate. But that, of course, raises the question, what if they're not college ready? And so her answer then is that make sure that the schools are college ready, that they are ready to graduate. Okay, so I'm going to stop the lecture here. I hope this helped. In the end, do watch the videos that I talked about on federal initiatives and do read Robinson. It is a large paper, but I think it can be useful.